eat, and play, for sustaining us and giving us the gift of life. Therefore, this acknowledgement is a call to action, committing us to understand and respect the history and ongoing struggles of Indigenous peoples. As settlers on the stolen land, we must continue to educate ourselves and strive to decolonialize every layer of our governance system and curricula. As we approach the end of the school year, we have a great opportunity to reflect on the progress of the latter. Also, with the beautiful spring finally coming, I encourage you to interact with our environment. Hi everyone, my name is Julie Choi. I will be serving as the Speaker of the Assembly. I am here to maintain order, ensure fairness, and guide us through the rules of procedure. Please take a moment to scan the QR code displayed to check yourself in. This ensures, oh, everyone's checked in, we're gonna skip over it. Now we're gonna move on to guest speaker. Today we recognize the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, marked by the United Nations and observed annually on March 15th to raise awareness of Islamophobia and promote a culture of tolerance and peace. This is a moment to reaffirm our commitment to challenging prejudice, rejecting stereotypes, and fostering a campus community grounded in respect and inclusion. With us today is Almaba Al-Naib, the Director of External Affairs of the Queen's University Muslim Students Association, a club that supports Muslim students, helps build community, and advocates for Muslim students on campus. She will now address the Assembly on the significance of this day and why this work matters here on campus.
Apologies, I am not a mama. I just wanted to say a few quick words, bringing us in and grounding ourselves in what is going to be presented. I know it's been a long assembly already with corporate General Assembly, but I want to reiterate the importance of guest speakers and presentations like this as a way to bridge connection and not just beyond just the education aspect as well. I think it's a huge, important part of making folks feel heard at governance levels and at decision making. So for you folks who are typing away at your laptops, I really encourage you to take some time to listen in, especially approaching the end in terms of what it looks like to support Muslim students at Queen's. Additionally, I wanted to mention that from our previous assembly themes, such as with the Iranian Student Association, as well as the Queen's Black Academic Society, lots of those presentations have led to actionable change and connection for those folks to different governance bodies or student governance bodies. So once again, I want to reiterate that a lot of these spaces and the time given to students is incredibly important for all of us here. So I want to again, please give a warm welcome to Omama from the Queen's Muslim Student Association. Do you want to just click through here? Okay. Or you can just put does that work for you?
Yeah. Okay, testing. Okay, thank you, Edward, and everyone for their kind introduction. So as mentioned, today I'm going to be speaking to mark the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Now, just as hate isn't born in a vacuum, neither was the recognition of this day. And I think a good place to start is defining Islamophobia. The UN recognizes Islamophobia as a fear, prejudice, and hatred of Muslims that leads to provocation, hostility, and intolerance by means of threatening, harassment, abuse, incitement, and intimidation of Muslims and non-Muslims. And it's Muslims and non-Muslims because even those that are perceived as Muslim can be victims of Islamophobia. Now, what does it look like? Now, there's some obvious things like how it can look like reducing Muslims to stereotypes, ignoring the complexity, humanity, contribution, and even diversity of Muslim students. You know, things like the assumption that Islam is for example, like, you know, some people think it's an Arab religion, but really, for example, they don't recognize or realize that the country with the most Muslims is not even an Arab country, it's Indonesia. But it can also be a lot more serious than that. It can involve life or death. For example, in 2025, a Muslim woman, visibly Muslim woman in a library, her hijab was almost lit on fire after someone physically and verbally abused her. In London, Ontario, in 2021, 4 members of a Muslim family were killed and a young boy was conflicted with life-altering injuries in a premeditated, hate-motivated vehicle attack. In 2017, 6 people were killed and 19 injured when a gunman opened fire in a mosque. Now just think about how that could make a Muslim student feel who might be walking home from class, or might be themselves just entering the library, assuming that would be a safe space to study. So Islamophobia is not only real, but it's close. And to get even closer to here at Queen's, and to talk about why it's important here, I want to note that it's not just about Muslim student safety. I think an important place or thing to look at is how combating Islamophobia, I view, is taking down the obstacles for Muslim students fully serving. To unpack this, I think an important thing to mention is how, while some make it seem that Islam is something foreign, that it's something strange, that it's incompatible with our shared values, those same people don't recognize that they themselves share those values. You see, values like service, benefiting the community around them. And Muslim students don't see Islam as a liability to their ambition and their desire to serve the community, but rather a reason for it. Through Muslim ways of knowing, we're taught that the best people are those that are the most beneficial to people. Things like, whoever saves a life is as if they saved all of humanity. That no Arab has a superiority over a non-Arab, nor a white over black, or black over white. He who's a believer is not someone whose stomach is filled while his neighbor goes hungry, and so on and so forth. And so, and we see this desire to serve through, things that Muslim student groups do on campus, like Kumsa, who not only does events involving things like well-being, like paint nights, but we also do charity events, like our charity fundraiser, or that satisfying photo of someone getting pied in the face for our Pie in the Face fundraiser. We also do Ramadan, a meal program where we serve hundreds of meals for students, and our doors are always open as an invitation to learn, engage, connect, and just share a meal. It's also on an individual level. We have, past, present, and I'm sure future Muslim leaders on campus, like Neshmia, who won the Peer Leadership Award and founded a charity club on campus. Anusha, who served as co-president in her department student council and was involved in supporting food insecurity programs through her role as peer health educator. Mina Wasim, who was the recipient of the 2024 Agnes Tricolor Benedictine Tricolor Award. Khadija, who was the AMS Social Issues Commissioner, was on the Shift Advisory Program, was part of the Students Experience Office, and had countless other roles. And so again, I reiterate, tackling Islamophobia is about taking down the obstacles to fully serving, because Muslim students, when they don't have to spend energy, dealing with the stereotypes, dealing with, actions of, stereotypical or discriminatory actions, they can spend that energy fully participating in student life. And I'll end off by mentioning just a few concerns, because I think this is a good place to mention them, of, as Director of External Affairs, what I've noticed in the community of the Muslim student concerns. And I call it Beyond Silent Coping, a Commitment to Equity, because students that I've talked to, a lot of them don't want to mention their concerns because as they call it, they don't want to make a scene or just cause a hassle. But I think a true commitment to equity means not shying away from mentioning those concerns, not as a way to demand change, but as a way to bring the reality of student life to the table so that we can collectively work to a truly more equitable campus. And so the first concern I wanted to share is halal food on campus. And while we've reached out to dining services and discussions are still ongoing, in the end, there have been multiple instances where halal items or non-halal items have been labeled as halal. And so, for example, in this picture, it was labeled, halal protein only, but it turned out to have pork, which is not considered halal. There are also times where there's missing labels. So something is halal, but it's not mentioned as such. And so students have to ask the staff, who ask a chef, who asks another chef, until they finally know that, okay, yes, I can eat this meal. So just imagine a first year going to dining hall, just wanting to have a meal before going to class and having just to deal with all those obstacles and all that time spent just to know if they can, have that meal. Another one is cross-contamination, where there's inconsistency in the use, even when there are utensils specific for non-halal and halal items, they're not consistently used. And in the end, these things, I think, work against the interest of students and dining services, because students feel uncomfortable, or they start to sometimes maybe have understandably a little bit of doubt on the halal labels because of the mislabeling that has happened and continues to happen. But also it works against dining services goals, because there's the broader goal of improving equitable access to food options on campus. So instances like these really work against that. Another one is, the second one I want to mention, and the final one, is the prayer spaces on campus. Now, some of you may not know that before the JEDIC was renovated, there was a prayer space on campus that was large enough to host the 5 daily congregational prayers that we have. And during the renovations, I believe the AMS gave us the Rideau space. And the Rideau space was also a really big space. It was great. But later, after the JEDIC renovations were complete, we also lost that space. And there were actually 2 losses involved with that. First of all, the actual space was lost, but also the location-wise, it was really beneficial to us, because in the Sterling Chernoff location kind of area of campus, there is currently no prayer space. And because there are 5 daily prayer spaces, it's like really a game changer when students have somewhere close by where they can safely perform their prayer. And so this year we were forced to book the FSL, which already has its own programming. And so it was really a logistical nightmare, to put it in briefly, to try to get that sorted out. And we're really grateful to FSL for, I guess, like, all their help in this, but in the end, it's not a sustainable solution. And with that, I just wanted to end off with this quote by Martin Luther King Jr., that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And it's the idea that whoever or whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Because in the end, Islamophobia hurts us all, because once dehumanization and discrimination and fear is accepted towards one group, that threatens the rights, safety, and dignity to all groups. And just as there are those who spread hate, lies, and dehumanizing narratives, we have to be just as intentional to stopping it through educating ourselves, speaking up, and showing up for one another. And so may we be people who speak truth, be there for one another, and stand together so that our campus, our community, and Canada at large is a place of safety, dignity, and peace for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move on to motion 1, which is the approval of the agenda. And the motion before the Assembly states that the AMS Assembly approve the agenda for the meeting of March 24th, 2026. Are there any amendments to be made to the agenda? Yes.
Hello. Hi, Rector Bourgeois-Hale. I would like to motion to move the discussion item on student fee nomination referendums to immediately after the observer reports. And I'm doing this because my first-year intern has been waiting in my office for 2 hours, and she has to leave at 7:30, and I don't want her to leave without presenting tonight. So I hope Assembly members take my plea.
Are there any speakers for this? All right, I will now call the question on making an amendment to the approval of the agenda today. All those in favor, please raise your placards. Those opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment to the motion is passed. Are there any further amendments to be made to the agenda? Yes.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Secretary Reddy, I have 3 motions to bring forward. So I'd like to motion to consider motion 2, 3, and 4 as one motion. And then also motion to strike motion 7 off the agenda, as well as motion to strike the discussion topic regarding elections and referenda brought forward by me in the interest of time. Thank you.
Are there any speakers for this amendment? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor to pass this amendment to the agenda, please raise your placard. Any clarification needed?
Hello. Okay, thank you. VP Nerzinski, are we, we're striking it, are we moving it to April 7th Assembly? I think they're important discussion, or motions to...
For motion 7, that one is going to be a memo sent out to all Assembly members on behalf of the club's commissioner. And then for my discussion topic, it'll also be in an email. But just in summary, just fill out the election and referenda survey and just let me know what your thoughts are on the elections and referenda process. Thanks.
Is there any further clarification required before moving forward? I will call the question again for this amendment to be applied to the approval of the agenda. Please raise your placards in favor. Those opposed? Any abstentions? The amendments are passed. Are there any further amendments for the agenda? Now I will call the question for the entirety of the amended agenda. Please raise your placard in approval. Those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is passed. We'll now move on to our executive reports. Please note, per policy, these are verbal summaries of their work, followed by the opportunity to ask questions during the question period. We will start with VP Nerzinski.
Hi, everyone. I gave a report earlier on today at the CAGM, so I have no other updates for you guys outside of that and outside of my written report. Thank you.
Next, we have VP Parisa.
Hi, everybody. I would first like to say a thank you to our speaker for providing the very educational presentation. I think, for me, some of the harmful instances mentioned are very uncomfortable to see and even discuss, but I think that's why it's so important that we have these conversations, because unfortunately, acts of Islamophobia happen on our very own campus, and every single one of us have a responsibility to combat it. So thank you very much for providing us with your insight so that we can all take that forward in our leadership. In terms of my report, I'd like to announce that the AMS has collaborated with the Downtown Kingston BIA to provide students with discounted tickets to the Road Trip Music Festival happening this September. With the loss of the orientation concert, one of my biggest goals was bringing back the concert, an event that I believed was really integral to our culture and keeping students safe during the UDSI period. Although this initiative is going to take multiple years, I'm excited for this partnership as it allows students to have a similar experience when they come to campus, and this time it's not exclusive to first-year students, it's going to be open to everyone. So this year's headliner is Peach Pit, and there are multiple other bands involved, which will also include some of our own student bands on campus. Buy your student discounted ticket, brought to you by the AMS using the link in the AMS Instagram bio. Further, our harm reduction efforts this period were a humongous success. Our continued collaboration and improved relationship with the city, bylaw, police showcased a very safe St. Pat's. Last year, we saw fines reaching over $30,000, and this year, fines were approximately $2,000. So this is a really great milestone for student safety, and I look forward to continued efforts in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now hear from our observer members. Each has 3 minutes to deliver their report, and questions can be directed during the question period. Firstly, we have Chairperson George.
Hi, everyone. Won't take up too much of your time as I know I've spoken enough today, but other updates outside of the CAGM, of course, is we have now our new formally board that will be starting their training transition with their onboarding board meeting happening this Thursday, as well as we have a board meeting coming up right after that onboarding board meeting on the Thursday as well to wrap up some of the last of the committee endorsed items, but as well as some regular procedural pieces. Additionally, we have the social that was sent out to all voting members incoming and outgoing of the assembly. So that social's at Fun Zone for laser tag, and that's, I saw that, Nikki. No, it's fine. Sorry, there's only so many spots. But that is gonna be for a laser tag social with the incoming and outgoing board and assembly. So please, if you have not filled that out, to complete that. If you are a FACSOC voting member and are not able to make it, you can also have someone take up your slot, either if you have someone within your organization that is not technically a voting member of assembly, but will be engaging in the assembly quite a bit. That's also definitely encouraged. The purpose of the social is just to be a more informal repertoire building ahead of the official assemblies that begin following April 30th. But I do hope to see as many assembly members to attend, and also food will be provided from some co-grow catering as well. And lastly, I just finished off that this is my last assembly as the chairperson of the board, so this will be my last chairperson report, and the following assembly will be provided by our interim chair at the time, which will be Vice Chairperson Ali. So thank you everyone for letting me serve in the role of chair of the board and for letting me speak to you each month, but also attending our semesterly meetings of the corporation. But if you have any questions around the board or its current processes, please feel free to contact me per my report, but I will leave the rest for the discussion item that I have later today.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Rector Boychuk-Hale.
Hi, I'll save my regular updates for our April 7th meeting just for the sake of time. All that I will add is that you're lucky non-voting members are not coming to this laser tag because I would have beat all of you.
All right. Now I invite Rector Boychuk-Hale to begin a conversation on potential changes to the AMS fee referendum process.
No, we don't have a slideshow, but we do have an appendix. I think it was G or something, Appendix E. So yeah, hopefully you've been able to read through some of that, but I do have my intern, Arabella Mew here, who's going to walk you through some of the details and kick off the discussion. I will first just give you a little bit of background. I've been in this role for almost 2 years now, and every single referendum period, I get an influx of students coming to my office, stressed, unsure, complaining, upset about the student fee nomination process. And as you might know, I also represent SGPS members and grad students, and I've never once had a grad student come to me with these types of concerns. And so it's been something on my radar for a while now, and so that's why we've delved into this process, and I will hand it over to my first year intern, Arabella.
So our office compared the AMS and SGPS policies for the fee referendum process, and then we also met with the SGPS executive director to ask clarifying questions and hear the benefits and disadvantages of the SGPS process. So just to give a quick overview of what the SGPS does, their director shared that groups have until the end of the nomination period to collect signatures, which gives them close to 50 days. And the purpose of this timeline is to make the process easier and to prevent referendum groups from feeling upset about insufficient time. But even with this timeline, some fees did not make it onto the ballot. The SGPS also checks signatures every 3 days at the beginning of the process, then every other day, and then once 5 days remain, they're checked daily. On the final day, they're checked every 2 hours. Eligibility of the people who sign is checked every time, which means that they check the people who signed the ballot are SGPS members, so an accurate number is reported. Additionally, social media is allowed to improve the accessibility for SGPS members, particularly those who may not be physically on campus. And the SGPS did acknowledge that their process is not perfect, but they find that it reduces barriers, creates transparency, makes the workload more manageable, and gives fee groups the best possible chance at making it onto the ballot if they're actively engaged in the process. And so just to quickly pull out some key differences here, we found that the AMS does not allow campaigning for the nomination period, which includes social media, whereas the SGPS does allow social media to ask for signatures. In terms of eligibility, the AMS does not check until after the nomination period closes, and the SGPS checks continuously. And then most notably, in terms of timeline, the AMS gives groups 4 days, whereas the SGPS gives nearly 50. And so we are bringing this to the AMS Assembly because we want to hear your perspective on the current fee referendum process and if the AMS should adopt an approach more similar to that of the SGPS. We have 3 guiding questions. First, do you think that the AMS should expand the number of days for signature collection, and if so, how many? Second, do you think the AMS should allow the use of social media to ask for signatures during the nomination period? And then finally, is there anything else the AMS should consider changing to make the nomination experience more transparent and accessible while maintaining the integrity of the process?
Thank you, Arabella, and she will have to leave pretty shortly. But the one thing I'll just underscore in case it's not apparent to you, the SGPS, they check the signature, they validate the signatures every few days and then every couple hours so that some people will sign and they're not actually a member, and so that way they know how many more signatures they need instead of thinking, oh, we have the right number of signatures and finding out after it's too late that some of them aren't valid. So that's there. I think the other ones are pretty apparent, but I'm hoping, I know nothing is going to get changed in the next couple of months, but my hope is you all have acquired a lot of knowledge and insight in your roles, and you might represent students who have fees or clubs or even your own faculty society who has to go through some of these. And if you have a recommendation or if you feel a certain way, even if it's no to some of these questions, I would love to hear that and collect that and then bring it forward to the next team to discuss where to go from here. So if you're willing to share your opinion, yay or nay, or other context, I would really, really appreciate it. Okay. Yep, Jordan.
Engineering Society Pres Jordan Belinsky. I think extending the time to collect signatures isn't a bad idea. Sometime maybe about 2 weeks, and even leading up, like how it's done right now is within 4 days, maybe doing a check 4 days leading up to it, just so there's going to be a larger quantity since it's undergrad groups. But having a signature check before so they can either get it all out of the way right away, and then they have a short period to just know how much they need if they need that last little stretch, if they think the signatures are all there. And then I'm also pretty pro social media campaigning as well. I think it's just a lot more accessible and a lot easier to kind of have some sort of page that can be accessed from anywhere so you can fully see what the fees are and have kind of a centralized platform to have kind of cohesive messaging.
Hi, Astis VP Ops, Jaden. I know we dealt with quite a few fees going to referendum in the last couple of years. A lot of different like sections of Astis always dealing with this process, and definitely I think I don't know what the administrative cost of increasing the amount of time given from 4 days to 50 would be, but however long of a period that could realistically be, I think the more time students have, the better. And I think the checking of signatures as often as, again, administratively possible. I think the worst thing would be an organization that could have gotten the amount of signatures and stopped promoting and doing the on-the-ground marketing and campaigning because they thought they'd reached it, only to find out, they're 4 signatures short because a couple people weren't eligible. And then finally, I think the biggest thing that I agree with is the social media marketing. I don't think there's been a campaign on campus in the last 5 years that hasn't been run nearly exclusively on Instagram. I know any of us that ran elections ran our campaigns like that, and there's as much foot traffic as we might get in some of the student spaces. I think a lot of our engagement comes from that. So, seeing as a lot of the organizations going to referendum are posting, what they do with their clubs, organizations. That's where their student body is. That's where their student body knows where to find them. So why this would be different would surprise me. So yeah, pro all the changes.
Hi everyone, it's Social Issues Commissioner Lekati. As somebody who went through referendum this season, first on the 50 days, I'm not sure if that's fully feasible because clubs need time to decide that they're going to go through referendum. So I think that there might be some difficulty with the AMS and like clubs actually having that time to go through fall and winter referendum. I do think that there needs to be more time than those 4 days, but not necessarily those 50 days. And if you're integrating social media to that nomination period, it might make it easier to provide like a week or two. I will say that nomination period not being on social media made it very difficult. One, for external people from Queens that weren't clubs, I found it very disheartening that they weren't able to find ways to collect nominations. They couldn't post on social media, they couldn't be in AMS spaces, and it feels like there's just so many regulations, which I understand because we don't want everything to go onto referendum because it is student dollars, but I think that if it does decide to go onto referendum and students do vote yes, we're allowing democracy and for students to actually see whether they want the fee or not. So I don't think it should be as difficult to be on the ballot because at the end of the day, students still get to vote on whether they want it or not. But that's just my standpoint.
Hello, Commissioner Tsai. I want to I guess emphasize as well some of those points that were brought up, especially by my fellow commissioner around the accessibility. I agree that having social media would have been such a huge benefit and honestly really taken off that huge burden on well-being for both internal and external groups. And I'm also thinking as well in terms of external groups, one of the groups that were unable to collect enough signatures was Real Out, which is for those of you who don't know, a very important queer film festival in Kingston. And while it is an external group, it has created a lot of spaces for students at Queens to find community, and we've, even beyond just that, optics-wise, the SIC has had a bit of difficulty in the kind of perception and backlash we have received in terms of trust from the queer community. And even above that, I think in terms of financial accessibility and physical accessibility, I think of the students who are primarily online, for example. How are they going to be seeing physical campaigning? They are still members of the AMS, and we have a due diligence to ensure we're effectively serving them.
Me, VP Nerzinski. I definitely think AMS, I guess, like criteria for where and how you can collect nomination signatures is, in my personal opinion, like pretty restrictive. Like if you look here, it says collect nomination signatures. Like you're not permitted to collect any nomination signatures at any assembly and or in classrooms, campus pubs, campus restaurants, cafeterias, AMS offices, AMS services, and or any other student service or location which is student run or associated by a member society. So that's pretty crazy. Like that's a lot of places on campus where students are, especially where students are like particularly engaged with student clubs, student life, student like activity on campus. So I definitely think, you know, matching that to SGPS a little bit more where it's less restrictive, I think is definitely a good idea. And I also agree that like checking signature verification is super important. I actually really like that system of how they update signatures and provide consistent updates on like how many signatures that you have that are valid, because if you don't know how many are valid, you're really just guessing, and it's hard enough sometimes to meet the actual nomination signature criteria. And then, you know, if you don't know if all of those signatures are actually valid, chances are you're probably going to collect a couple extra to be sure, and that's just an additional burden as well. So it's my personal opinion, but I am a fan of that process that SGPS follows.
Chief Electoral Officer Wong Ma. I think on behalf of the Civic Affairs Office, we would definitely be, we definitely want to make it more accessible to everyone, and we want to make I definitely think that the social media presence could be a great idea. And we would be also open to expanding the window for nomination, but it does require some sensitivity because while it does run the risk of certain external groups not meeting that nomination requirement, having too much time would essentially allow a lot of external groups to be present on the ballot, and when it gets to the ballot, it's very likely that these groups will be passing because it requires 50% to pass, and that is very often met. But with that in mind, we would be open to readjusting that window, the 4-day window, but it does just require some extra care.
Thanks, everyone. That was really, really helpful for us to hear, and I would love potentially to hear some maybe concrete days that your team would think would be feasible. Whoever's coming into your roles next year is not going to have that insight, but even if it's, you know, a 2-week period or a 10-day, like something a little bit more exact that you think would be manageable there. I know the signature verification is one where you're going to verify those people anyway, and once you verify them once, you don't do it again, so it's less of a added burden. But certainly when you extend the period of nominations, you also have to be aware of election violations and things like that. So it would be very important for us to hear that recommendation as we discuss in the next assembly group. Do you have something to say? Secretary, ready?
Thank you. For one thing that I want to comment on is extending the days that allow groups to collect signatures. It does kind of eat away at the time that they have to prepare their validation packages. And that's one thing that I've noticed within the Internal Affairs Office, that it does take groups a very long time to get these packages ready, to get all the updated materials, because it will go to the SAF committee for review, and sometimes the SAF committee will review them and see that, you know, they're missing some information, so then they'll send them back a decision letter and give them more time to, you know, update their documents. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of administrative work and also coordinating a lot of people. And so sometimes it could delay the process just because there's a limited amount of time that we have in the Internal Affairs Office, given that everyone only holds their position for a year. And this year in particular was very rough. But yeah, I think it works to open it maybe up for a week. And then allowing them to campaign on social media just because it gives them more exposure. But yeah, that's something that we can discuss further.
Great, thank you. So we'll end it there unless anyone has a new thought to add to the conversation. Oh, we have more new thoughts.
Sorry, guys. My only thought was to be, just to keep in mind and be considerate of, I know, Bill 33. We will be receiving those regulations on our fee slates towards universities and student unions soon, in the next couple of months, probably even as soon as May. And so that's just one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking of like how we want to restructure the referendum process and collecting nominations, because honestly that could be completely overthrown by the regulations we'll be receiving from the government. So I think a lot of what was discussed was good, but also keeping in mind the current structure we have now is because of the Student Choice Initiative in 2019, which is very similar to Bill 33 now. So I don't want, like, keeping in mind with the conversation and moving forward, just to remember that there is this big regulation that is going to be given to us soon, and so that's something that we're going to have to work with as opposed to making any progress against. But yeah.
That is an excellent new thought, and you're absolutely correct. I really hope that the government doesn't give us that granular of a mandate, but you never know. So it will be something that kind of gets addressed as Bill 33. Yeah. So anyway, Drayden, did you want to Say your bit. Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for your contributions. And if you have any other thoughts, you can send them our way or come to our office. And thank you, Arabella.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to statements by students. We will first hear the statements listed on the agenda, and then I will open the floor for any other students who wish to speak. So firstly, we have the chair of the Student Activity Fee Review Committee, Secretariat Ready.
Hello? I have no updates on behalf of the Student Activity Fee Review Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, the floor is open for statements from any other students. Are there any statements to be made? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Commissioner Tsai. I have a small update and announcement as Social Issues Commissioner, as well as in collaboration with the Secretariat's office. Over the past few weeks, we've been developing an AMS Assembly Culture and Equity Survey to help kind of assess, as many of you are outgoing members of Assembly, to understand where there might be some what has kind of worked in terms of promoting equity and diversity and inclusion within these Assembly spaces, as well as where there might be some areas of improvement for not just making Assembly safe, but also making Assembly empowering and really championing anti-oppressive principles. So I really want to reiterate the importance of this survey as it comes out likely today or tomorrow, sometime this week, in developing strategic actions and recommendations for next year's. The data will be held confidentially by myself and the Secretary Ready. And one other thing I wanted to note is that there are demographic questions being asked. However, the form does not collect any names, positions, faculty, societies. The demographic questions are intentionally meant to be vague, so no one can be identified from these responses. So I really encourage all of you to be honest and constructive in your responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further statements to be made during this period? Seeing none, we will move on to the question period. The floor is now open for any questions. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move on to business arising from minutes, followed by new business. We will now consider the following motions, and as a reminder, motions 2, 3, and 4 were combined due to the amendment made earlier today. So the first part of the motions is motion 2, which states that the AMS Assembly approve the meeting minutes for the meeting of February 10th, 2026, as seen in Appendix A, and this was moved by Secretariat Ready, seconded by CGO Horbatso. The second part of this motion states that the AMS Assembly approve the meeting minutes for the meeting of March 10th, 2025, as seen in Appendix B, and moved and seconded by the same individuals. And the last part states that motion 4, that the AMS Assembly approve the extension of March 3rd, 2026 special meeting minutes release until April 7th, 2026. I now invite the mover to speak on the motion.
Hello, Secretariat Ready. I have no comments. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers for or against this motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please raise your placard. Those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion technically 2 is passed. We will now move on to new business. The first is motion 5, which states that the AMS Assembly approve the removal of Assembly Policy, Part E, Section 8.1.A. This motion was moved by VP Parisa, seconded by Commissioner Schmidt. I now invite the mover to speak on this motion.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everybody. In terms of this motion, if you were to open the Assembly Policy, Section 8.1A, I'll just read it out. It is that the Sustainability Advisory Committee has a mandate as follows: to disperse all grants associated with the Sustainability Action Fund optional student activity fee as outlined in the grants and bursary policy. Something that I noted during my term is that this is the only grant or bursary within the AMS that is not distributed internally and relies on an assembly committee. And something we've faced is challenges when it comes to scheduling and like timely disbursement of it. So in order to standardize our grants processes, I thought it would make most sense to make that internal and band an internal committee aligning with our other grants and bursaries. So that way this committee could more so focus on being an actual advisory committee when it comes to policy or potential environmental actions taken by the commission. So yeah, that's my reasoning. I'm happy to answer any questions or hear your thoughts about what this could potentially mean.
Thank you very much. Debate is now open. Yes.
Claire Nolly, Nursing Science Society. Just wondering, would it be more helpful to create the committee and then remove it? Or, I don't know, just thinking about timing.
Yeah, totally see your point. The idea is that if this were to be then approved, during the summer, the grants and bursaries policy gets reviewed and updated by the VPUA anyways. So since that review would be happening in the summer, if we were to do this now, it will then be reflected in the grants and bursaries policy right afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any speakers for or against this motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion 5 is carried. We will now consider motion 6, which states that the AMS Assembly approve of the budget for the Orientation Roundtable Office for 2026 to 27, pending approval from the Board of Directors as presented in Appendix C. This motion was moved by ORT Director Elmhurst, seconded by VP Parisa. I now invite the mover to speak on this motion.
Hi everyone, so nice to see you all. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, hi, I'm Olivia. I'm the ORT director, and today I'll be presenting the proposed ORT budget for 2026-2027. Okay, so first, going over some of ORT's financial objectives for the year. First off, we have ensuring financial transparency between ORT, AMS, FACSOC presidents, and faculty executives. So throughout the process when things arise, making sure we're keeping open lines of communication between all relevant parties. Prioritizing the increase in sponsorship while also being transparent and realistic about our goals, which I'll discuss later. Promoting the reuse of equipment throughout the fall orientation period, and lastly, ensuring that volunteer appreciation and mindful use of working hours are reflected in our budgeting through training. So first, we'll start off with revenue. Our requested allocation from Assembly is $138,000, which is remaining the same as last year. So a 0% increase. For sponsorship, we have $25,000, which is a 23% decrease from last year's budget, as it has historically has been $32,500. Although increasing sponsorship revenue is a financial objective of ORT, we really want to be realistic with the fact that this goal has not been met in the past several years. So the highest it's been was Fall Orientation 2024, which was at $28,730, but that was also a reflection of concert sponsorship, which we no longer have within the orientation period. So as well as it's a goal of ours, but we really want to be transparent and realistic about what that sponsorship looks like for us. In terms of event revenue and student orientation fees, we have $244,000, which is a 1.6% increase from last year's budget, which is in line with inflation increases and reflects added fees from Queen's custodial services, which I'll discuss later in the presentation. Okay, so looking at ORT-specific expenses, first off, we have taxis and travel, which covers ORT, so my team of 6, our transportation throughout the orientation period, which is U-Hauls and rental cars, which is a slight increase from last year's actuals. We have wages, which totals to $110,190, which is a 2.3% increase from last year's budget and an increase of 22% from last year's actuals. So breaking down that wages category, we have 26% being head manager wages, 16% being assistant manager wages, which has been slightly increased to account for increased working hours during the fall orientation period. And then we have staff wages, which make up 56% of the total wages. We note that there is quite a difference between the actuals and what's budgeted specifically for staff wages, and that can be explained by unfulfilled roles within ORT within the past several years, as well as late hiring. So for example, as per the board approved comp grid, we have hours allocated throughout the fall, but this year we didn't have anyone hired at that point, so those hours remained unfilled. So that largely explains the discrepancy there. And then lastly, we have uniforms, this is 1,000, and that accounts for the uniforms of all 6 members of ORT. Okay, next up we have faculty expenses. So first we have security, which is at $5,000, and this reflects all student constables throughout the orientation periods at all events. It's a 4% increase from last year's actuals. For all of these categories, it's important to note that these are split between all 8 faculties and not equally. So it's dependent on whether these expenses are utilized at events. So events that have large amount of SUCONs, faculty expenses are reflected when invoiced. So for equipment rentals, we're at $23,500, and this entails all orientation equipment. So speakers, mics, scaffolding, tables and chairs, all that fun stuff, which is a 4.9% increase from last year's actuals, and the increase can be explained by an increase in vendor prices, which we were recently informed of. For event expenses, we are at $60,000, which is a 9% increase from last year's budget. This budget line covers coverall paint, water bottles, and kit bags. And this can be explained by the increased cost of water bottles, which aligns with our sustainability goals for this year. And then we have miscellaneous, which is at $17,500. This budget line covers beacon lights, so traffic cones and all of our road closure equipment, as well as power panel use, porta potties, and Queen's custodial services. This sees a 250% increase from last year's budget, and it reflects costs billed by Queen's custodial services during fall orientation 2025. So it was an anomaly from the previous year's budget as this expense was not predicted. So currently within the actuals, this invoice is not reflected within those actuals because we just received the invoice last week. So that can explain the difference there. For room rentals, we're at $38,000, and this budget line reflects all indoor spaces booked for orientation events, which is a 15% decrease from last year's budget and a 6% increase from last year's actuals. For taxis and travel, so this entails all busing for off-campus events. We see a 13% decrease from last year's budget and an 11% increase from last year's actuals, and that can be explained by an increase in off-campus events in a couple of faculties this year. For transportation, we're at $9,000. This is our U-Haul budget. It's an 18% decrease from last year's budget, and it reflects some faculties booking their own U-Hauls. And then lastly, for uniforms, we're at $90,000. This is our t-shirt budget, which is a 10% decrease from last year's budget and an 11% increase from last year's actuals. And this just accounts for inflations within our t-shirts, as well as some potential changes that are being made to the t-shirts. Okay, lastly, we have training expenses. This area sees an overall decrease of 11% from last year's budget, and that reflects a decrease in training commitments for orientation leaders and executives. So for example, we host a executive training day for all 123 of our executives, and this year was cut from 2 days down to 1 day. So simply we don't have to pay for the other day, which is awesome. And this is reflecting in leader training in March as well as August. So for food and beverage, we're at $9,000, which is a 10% decrease from last year's budget and an increase from actuals. We have equipment rental, which is $1,500, and this is all of our equipment for training. So in August, we have generator training with all the executives, so pays for that. And it aligns with the previous year's actuals. For event expenses, we see an increase of $1,500 for the incorporation of student constables at our training, which aligns with the insurance requirements for events of the size, considering we do host 1,200 leaders in one space for training. And then lastly, we have miscellaneous, which is $500, which sees a 50% decrease from last year's budget. So thank you for your consideration, and listen to me ramble. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Olivia, for that presentation. That was great.
Thank you.
First question that I have is, so I'm just looking at the, I guess, financial statement that we were provided in Appendix C, and I can see that actuals in 2025, ORT ended in a $20,000 deficit, and then obviously for this past year, I just presented that, obviously ORT didn't spend as much as it was anticipating and ended in a $33,326 surplus. It's looking like up until year-to-date actual plus Feb, April. Yes. So how are you going to make sure that ORT this year is going to meet in the middle and not end in either a $20,000 deficit or, I guess, I would say a larger size surplus of $33,000?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Something important to note within those actuals is it's plus February and April, but those are with predicted expenses. So what I mentioned about Queen's custodial services and the additional charge, that is not reflected in the actuals as we just received the invoice. So that $33,000 has been reduced by that invoice. But great question about generally kind of balancing the surplus and the deficit. I think a major area where that comes from is within wages. And again, some of that was just unforeseen, unfilled positions within ORT, people not working their full hours, people not using up all those hours. So I think it's really important within my role to ensure that the hours that we've been allocated and given from the comp grid are being used to their full potential, because as I'm sure you all know, orientation's quite a lot, and if we have the hours, we would like to be using them. So that's also why it's super important within that budget line to budget as if we will be using all of the allocated money for that. So I think that's a big area. And I think just going back to that financial transparency piece, that throughout the process, we're making sure that all relevant stakeholders are being made aware of this to ensure that we kind of find that middle ground between the 2 years. Thank you.
Hi, Rector Boychuk-Hale. I have two quick questions. One is, do you think that the Queen's custodial service fee is reasonable, or if there's room to negotiate it, especially if you weren't aware of it beforehand? There's a lot of these expenses, there's nothing you can do about it, but that might be one. And the reason why I ask is when you book through Queen's Event Services, there's a mandatory space cleaning fee, even if you were to hold a club team meeting where there's literally no mess being made, they still charge you a 3-hour cleaning fee, versus the Student Life Center, shout out, doesn't do that. So I'm wondering if there's room there to maybe negotiate it next time and get a better deal with these student dollars. And my second question is more for faculties. As someone who's not involved in this at all, why would you book your own U-Hauls when ORT would pay for them? How does that work?
Yeah, two great questions. Starting off with the Queen's custodial service charge, this was something that is charged to ORT every single year, but it was an increased invoice this year due to an anomaly between the 2 years. So in the previous year when we received this charge, it was significantly less because it only reflected one orientation weekend, which was a bit of an anomaly that year. So now that that fee reflects both weekends, the fee has been increased. But I definitely think there is room for some of that negotiation, and also advocating for some more transparency so this isn't something that ORT is caught off guard by in the future. So I think now that we've received it, it's a great opportunity for me, as well as the other perm staff and folks who support ORT, to advocate for some more transparency as to what that charge is going to look like. Because again, what you were saying, you get that fee when you book any room, but in terms of orientation, it is a little bit unique because orientation kind of takes over campus, but I think there's definitely room for some transparency there and some negotiation to ensure that something like this doesn't happen in the future. In terms of ORT U-Hauls, so all of the faculty expenses are paid for by ORT and then invoiced back to the faculties. So when books all those U-Hauls, we pay for it up front, and then in the fall, all of those are invoiced back to the faculty societies. So it just kind of ensures streamlined between all of the different faculties, because we manage all 8. But what I meant by some faculties booking their own, some of the larger faculties who have quite a lot of logistical demands and stuff, this has been a change that has been incorporated in the past couple of years, but for the most part, all faculties book through ORT because we do it in one streamlined process, and then it's invoiced back to the faculties, if that makes sense. Happy to answer more questions if you'd like.
Yeah, so are you budgeting for paying for the faculties, but then your actuals are much lower because you're only footing the bill of ORT's U-Hauls, or you're never budgeting for FacSoc U-Hauls because that will always come back to you?
Yeah, so in all of these faculty expenses here, this is budgeting as if faculties are booking their U-Hauls through ORT as per the regular policy, but that was more just a phrase as to why it was seen as a decrease in the actuals and stuff. And then in terms of ORT specific U-Hauls, which aren't charged to the faculty, because that's typically just within the 6 of us using transportation, that's reflected within our expenses, which are not charged back to the faculties. So there's just a little bit of a difference there, but it is to allocate for the fact that faculty should be booking their U-Hauls through us, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Oh, hello. I think it's on. Just to speak to the booking of U-Hauls and why FactSox would go a different direction. I know in the past we might book some through ORT, but I know ASIS books a lot of its own as well. Just for us, we have a large ORT or like orientation team that can do the administrative side of our own bookings. They are licensed to end up driving those U-Hauls as well. And it's a little bit faster for us on our budget end to know that, we've paid off our U-Haul. The bill from ORT comes in quite a bit later, and we don't pay it until our student fees come in December. So sometimes it is just easier to get that bill out of the way, especially with a faculty of our size. We can afford to pay it up front and just go from there. I don't know how other faculty societies do it, but we kind of just do the ORT stuff, like table bookings and stuff that we have to. Anything else that we can do our own, we will. It's just a little bit easier to pay up front. As for how it shows up on a budget, I may be wrong, but at least for anything that they would bill us, it would show as an expense and then also show as an equal income on both ends. So it shows that they paid it for us, but that we paid them back for it. So it should still even out for anything that any bill, regardless of U-Hauls, table bookings, that gets passed on to a faculty society.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also super important to note that it's a great point that you make specifically to ArtSci because of the size and because of the caliber of ArtSci orientation specifically. That's something that faculty society has explored. But in terms of a lot of the other smaller faculties and such, all of the revenue that pays for all of these orientation expenses come in August when students pay for orientation, and that's when all of their fees come in. But the problem is all of this equipment is booked months and months in advance, so it's booked by ORT because we do have the funds to pay for it, and then it's charged back just for that process. Also important to note that like ArtSci is a unique faculty in the sense of head Gale is a paid position, that type of thing, that they have more of a capacity to manage that stuff comparatively to a lot of the smaller faculties and other faculties where all of their executive team are volunteers.